Hey guys, Jake Carlson here, host of the Modern Leadership Podcast. Are you ready to focus on amplifying your leadership superpowers? Let's go! Hey all, welcome to another exciting Chat with the Author episode of the Modern Leadership Podcast. As you know, monthly we deep dive into a new book, all of which come highly recommended, and then we sit down with the author to learn even deeper. This month we'll be learning from a terrific leadership book, H3 Leadership, Be Humble, Stay Hungry, and Hustle by Brad Lomenick. And today I would like to welcome Brad as our guest. Brad, how are you doing today?
I'm good, Jake. I wish I was with you in the United Kingdom, though. I'm in Atlanta, so this was boring. Come on.
Well, and I see the blue skies that you have in Atlanta, and I look out and see the gray that we have even mid-May, and I say, well, maybe I could do a little Atlanta too.
Yeah, it's hot here. I mean, we're living up to our reputation of hot Atlanta, so we're in the 90s already in May, which scares a lot of people off. But you know, it is what it is, and the reality of Atlanta is this, that those who live here love it, and those who visit sometimes do, especially in the airport. But most of the time, those who visit the airport don't love it because it's tough to get through. But you know, we do love Atlanta. That's something that we all have in common. That those of us who live here is we have a deep affinity for it. And Augusta, as we were talking before we started recording.
Yeah, and I've only been to Atlanta a few times, and I've always loved it, but I'm loving it from the position of someone who comes in, spends a little bit of time downtown, stays at the hotel, and then jumps out. And I know that airport can be a real drag, but I've always loved Atlanta.
We are the busiest airport in the world. Many people don't know that, but it is the busiest in the world. And any of us who live here call Delta, if we've traveled a lot, we love Delta, and sometimes we hate Delta, but most of the time we love it.
Well, and you and your business and what you're doing as an author and a speaker and going around, you spend a lot of time in the airport. And in a past life, I used to spend even more time than I do now in an airport. But when you do spend so much time out and about and seeing the world, you really learn to appreciate efficiencies in the airport and those that can get you in and out and moving you along as easy as possible. Am I right?
No question, man. Yeah. And you also love direct flights. That is one of the benefits of flying Delta out of Atlanta is we can pretty much get anywhere in the world except for a few places without having to connect. And then obviously the same is true returning. You know, you don't have to connect when you live here, which takes a lot of the stress out of the traveler who has to come through the airport compared to flying in and out of this airport. It's a whole different ballgame.
And I would say that those who are not road warriors, that don't understand being on the road quite a bit, they won't understand this. But flying out of Phoenix, which is where I was stationed when I was flying, I loved U.S. Airways. They're gone now. But the reason I loved them is because I had that elite status, so I could bypass the line and just go straight in through the security check. And I would imagine you've got that with Delta as well.
Yeah, I'm all of those higher statuses, the Sky Club and the Diamond Medallion and the Clear subscription, which comes with being a diamond and pre-check and priority. All there's hacks definitely. When you fly a lot, you figure out how to make it work. And I think for all of us, and me especially, when I get to the airport, I know down to the minute, I can almost be very close to what is expected of the process of going through security and getting to my gate and the traffic. And, so you create systems that work. Man, the weary traveler, though, that is people think who don't travel with work or with their vocation or with whatever they're doing, they think, oh, that seems fun. And then those of us who do travel a lot, we look at it and go, it's just part of the reality of our life. And, you make it the best you can. And you make it work as much as you can, and you got to have a lot of patience. And so at the end of the day, I do know that everybody at the airport, anybody who works in the airport or Delta or TSA or any of those people, sometimes we get really frustrated with them. And I've learned they're trying to help us get to where we want to go as fast as we can. And they're not the problem. So many times we go through security or we deal with an agent or we deal with people who are working for an airline and they become the problem. And I just want to tell people, listen, man, they're equally motivated to get you to where you want to go. So let's work together on this and not feel like they're the enemy.
Yeah, and if you ever see someone, in a heated conversation with someone, the TSA or a gate agent, you'll know that they're not a road warrior. You know that they're not out there all the time, because once you do it enough times, you recognize it's going to happen. So Brad, you and I, we could chat about being road warriors and being on airplanes all day long. I want to thank you for joining us today. I want to talk about a lot of stuff, particularly about this H3 book. But before we get too far, I want to give the listeners a little bit of background about you. So you're the author of 2 books, The Catalyst Leader and, of course, H3 Leadership. You spent over a decade equipping, inspiring, and releasing the new generation of young Christian leaders through events, resources, and consulting, a movement known as Catalyst. You're an Oklahoma Sooner fan, a decent golfer, a duck hunter, a skier, a pilot. You've had the pleasure of interviewing some of our modern leadership's favorite people, Malcom Gladwell, Seth Godin, Marcus Buckingham, and more. Brad, that's your life summed up in 2 sentences. What did I miss? That's
pretty good. I'm an Oklahoma boy. I grew up in Oklahoma in a small town outside of Tulsa. And so the Oklahoma Sooners, for anybody out there who are college football or college sports fans, and especially those of you who like Oklahoma Sooners, we just high five virtually. That was a big part of my childhood and growing up in Oklahoma, and then going to school at University of Oklahoma, where I was a history major, which is pretty much worthless. But one of the things that I love to talk about too is I spent a bunch of years working with John Maxwell, and many of your listeners would probably be familiar with John. He's arguably one of the grandfathers now of leadership and of, I would say, modern leadership, to not take your name, but there's something about working for John that I was able to, in many ways, by osmosis, being around him, pick up and make part of my own DNA, my own leadership DNA, that I think now, especially for the next generation, I'm trying to pass on. And so that season of working with John was so important and special, and really for me was the catalyst to lots of opportunities I have today. And we built this thing called Catalyst. That was part of John's organization, and it was our attempt to try to connect and resource the next generation, especially those in their 20s and 30s. And so I spent a bunch of years doing that. And the premise for me, Jake, is that we're all standing on somebody else's shoulders, and I'm standing on John's, and John was standing on others, and now I'm hopefully got some guys that are standing on my shoulders, and I want to pass that on and try to be as much as I can a platform builder that allows for not just my voice and my message, but other messages to get out.
Well, and I can't imagine anyone listening to this podcast will not have known and heard the name John Maxwell. But I got to ask you, in those time working with him, is there a story that jumps out to you, a real learning or mentoring opportunity that you've just taken with you that you could share with us?
Oh gosh, there's a bunch. I mean, John was so much fun to travel with. Speaking of travel, like John is his personality is one that he's incredibly persuasive, which comes across in his speaking and writing, but he's also just a lot of fun. And I remember we did a book tour one time, which I was helping put on, and it was our last city in St. Louis, and we were flying back home after that, and John, basically took the entire crew in a surprise moment. He said, "All right, before we get to the airport, we're going to the best barbecue in St. Louis." And we not only just absolutely just crushed the barbecue, but we celebrated in a way that really taught me this lesson of, along the journey, you got to stop and celebrate. You got to let people feel the value of winning. And it was one of those moments, because I was still, I'd been working for John for a few years and working with him and doing these kind of book tours. And at that point, you think, hey, he's tired, we're tired, let's just get home. But I think the lesson for me in that moment, again, in St. Louis at the best barbecue, is when you're the one in charge and you're the one that's been really the point of something like a book tour, then it's on you to be the one who models this idea of let's stop and celebrate. And that just still permeates with me of let's not lose sight of the fact that people want to feel valued, and they want to feel honored, and they want to be part of something where they feel like they're winning. And so, we showed up at the airport still with a bunch of leftovers and probably stunk up the whole plane with our crew getting on with barbecue still from 30 minutes, an hour earlier. But it was a great lesson of enjoy the journey.
What a great story. And a couple of things that jumped out to me that I see as real leadership moments that were taught there, Brad, is number one is, he was tired. You were all tired, but there's opportunity. People are watching you all the time. There's opportunities to exemplify your leadership. People are keeping their eye on you and seeing how you react at all times. And a moment to him that was just probably a thought that crossed his mind. It wasn't something that he sat down in a leadership meeting and sketched out on a notepad and said, this is how we're going to implement it. Step 1, step 2, step 3. It was something that just happened in that moment. And I think as leaders, those are the moments that we need to look for, where we can step up knowing that people are looking at us and that we can teach a lesson that is stuck with you this many years later. And as you talk about, you stand on his shoulders. Now you have many other people standing on your shoulders, including myself as a reader of your book. You can see that progression, that learning and that lesson is passing on from generation and reader. So that was a big takeaway that I had from that. And I appreciate you sharing it.
Yeah. And, the other thing John taught me is that one, everybody has value, and that our job is to add value to everyone. So there's two sides of that. Everyone has value, and our job as leaders and as people, as influencers, is to add value to everyone. And treat the person walking up to get their book signed the same way you treat the CEO who just paid you a lot of money to spend a day with you, to also treating the show pro person who's doing security at that arena. Treat them all like they have value, and stop and just pay attention to people and notice, and don't get too big for your britches. I think I remember my parents telling me that when I was young, and even today that rings true. Like as far the further we go up the ladder of leadership and of power and influence and notoriety and popularity, whatever it is, like the more we have to stoop down to people who are around us and pull them up with us. And that's, again, John did that and still does that. He pulls people up to the mountaintop with him. And I've heard him say so many times, if you're going on the journey by yourself and you get to the top of Everest and nobody's with you, then that's a loss. That's a leadership loss. On your scorecard of leadership, you just failed, compared to take people with you on a journey, many times pushing them up to the top of Mount Everest before you get there. And you gotta have people with you if you're gonna really truly win. So that's another one that stands out for me from all those years of being around and learning from the Godfather, Dr. John Maxwell.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And one thing that came across my mind as we were talking about this is, give people an opportunity to astonish you, and they will. Trust in people. Allow them to use their expertise and their skill. Allow them to astonish you, and they will. So you've used a word a couple of times. I know it was the name of an organization that you worked with. You were CEO for a number of years. You used it in a sentence talking about John Maxwell as well. And the word is catalyst. And I want to talk about that word itself and what that word means for those who don't know, and also the power behind the word catalyst.
Yeah. Well, we started it back in 2000 as an event, and the premise of Catalyst was truly for not only for us to create a catalyst type of leader, but also that we wanted to be a catalyst. And catalyst in its purest form is something that creates spark or change, but leaves no residue of itself. And that whole sentence is really important when you think about what's a catalyst leader. It's the idea that I'm walking in and creating change in a good way. I'm creating a spark. I'm making a difference, but it's not about me. I'm a agent of change, but I'm not the ultimate expression of change. I'm coming in to help see something happen, but at the end of the day, the story is bigger than I am. It doesn't have to come back to me, and leaves no residue of itself. That's such a powerful phrase as a leader. Is that I make things happen, but I'm not leaving a bunch of people in the ditch. There's not a bunch of bodies lying around after I came in and created change. And a lot of leaders think that's their role, is to come in and sort of, create such change as a catalyst that it creates negative repercussions. And so that's the essence of what a catalyst is. And over the last 18 years, with my leadership and many others, and I was part of it in the beginning, and I stepped out of it a couple of years ago to be able to still be involved, but yet speak and write and do other things. What I continue to be really passionate about, connected to this movement of catalyst, is that there's a generation of leaders who are showing up at these conferences and events, and they're part of this tribe and this community that's called Catalyst, that really do want to change the world. And they are coming together, and they're being inspired, and they're going out and being released back into their communities, back into their businesses, into their churches, into their nonprofit environments, into their social innovation companies, whatever they're building, and they're going to do it better. They're going to lead well. So at the end of the day, like, what we've tried to do for almost 2 decades is to create an environment where leaders can be inspired and they can connect with each other and then walk back into their communities and truly live out what does it mean to be a catalyst. So it's both a word, it's both a phrase, it's a brand, it's a movement, and hopefully it's an identity. That's the real goal, is that we're moving and making a difference in the way people actually do life, and they lead not just better, but they lead well.
And I think this is a great transition into the book, H3 Leadership. And the reason is because you were talking about changing the world, and you talked about Catalyst being this movement, this tribe, this meaning, this word that's all about going big and changing the world and having a positive effect. But underlying all that you were saying and how you were talking about it, you could just tell that there was this humility, that it wasn't about leaving your mark on the world, but making the world a better place. And maybe you don't leave any residue behind through your leadership, which leads us right into H3 leadership. Be humble, stay hungry, and hustle. And you start off with be humble. And so that's why I thought it was a great transition. I want to talk about this book. I've spent the last couple of weeks diving into it, really enjoy the book. It caught me off guard. And I'll tell you, Brad, it came highly recommended, but for the life of me, I cannot remember who recommended it. As I get recommendations, I write them down. I didn't write down who said it. I just had it on my list. And so when we got to this month, I said, this is a book that came recommended. I want to read it. So I picked it up. I had no idea what it was about other than, it's got the title. And immediately a couple of things jump out. First of all, you have a tremendous foreword in the book, which I want to talk about in just a minute. But then you go right into the story of how you got to this position where you were writing the book. And so for the listener who maybe hasn't picked up the book yet, can you give us just a quick background of what led to you writing the H3 Leadership book?
Yeah. Well, and thanks for setting that up, because I love talking about that story. And, I was leading this conference movement called Catalyst, but my leadership was starting to get stale. And I'd been in it for, 10 plus years. And I have this moment really that I try to capture in the book of going on a sabbatical and stepping away from the day-to-day grind. And I'm in the UK with a friend of mine who's helping me kind of process life and process the journey so far and what I want to be about, what my leadership should be. And all of that led to me sort of, I would say, recapturing in many ways what I felt like were the most important habits that created a great leader. And so H3 is a framework built on some things I was not actually doing well along the journey. And, I think a lot of us, if we're honest, we've learned the most from people who talk about the things they learned in failing or in areas that they were becoming dysfunctional in, or in things that they weren't doing well at the time. And that's true for me. Like I was leading a conference movement that was gathering leaders and talking about leadership, but I was in danger of becoming stale, of leading in an unhealthy manner, of getting outside of my comfort zone of what I had built, for a decade, what I felt like was a great organization and a great movement, but yet all the things for me were starting to decay. And so in many ways, this book is the lessons from that, of recalibrating my own leadership and saying, hey, for the next 30, 40 years of my life, I want to be about this. Like if I could live out this premise of H3 of humble, hungry hustle, and also the habits that come with those 3 buckets, then I'm going to get to the finish line and look around and go, well done. Like I'll be able to look back at life and say, I ran the race well. And I think so many of us, Jake, like we get into leadership, and the things that we got in it for many times start to get pushed to the side. And we forget all the things that are so true and important about our leadership that we know are right. I mean, none of this is groundbreaking news. Nobody's reading my book going, oh, Brad, like you just rock my world with all these new ideas. I mean, these are things that we all shake our head and go, that makes sense. But it's the habits. It's that sense that we're going to put this into practice, and we're going to start to live out of a framework that we keep going back to over and over and over again. And, so that's the backstory. I mean, I think one of the great lessons for me, and one of the things in the book that so many people resonate with is I had this moment, and you may remember the story from the book. Our team, this was like right around the time when I was working on the book, and our team went out for a celebration, which at the time was hard for me to even let happen. And we won a bunch of tickets at Dave & Buster's. We were all celebrating, we're playing skee ball and basketball shoot and all that stuff. And we got a bunch of tickets. And so we had enough tickets to buy something in the store. And the team went and bought 2 dolls, which I don't know why they have dolls in Dave & Buster's, but they bought 2 dolls, one of which was an angel doll. And so they bring these to me after they go and buy these in the store at Dave & Buster's. They said, hey, Brad, we got a gift for you. Thanks for letting us celebrate. Here's our gift to you. And I pull out the first doll, which is an angel doll. And they said, there you go. That's you. Like, that's Brad. We love you as our leader. Thanks for being so encouraging and so caring. And then okay, what else is in the bag? And then there's this Satan doll, which again, why does Dave & Buster's have a Satan doll and an angel doll? But the Satan doll is, I pull that out and I'm like, well, okay, what's the story on this one? And they said, that's Darb. Like, who's Darb? They said, that's what your nickname has been for the last year. Darb. Oh, it's Brad backwards. Uh-huh. Got it. And I said, well, who's Darb? And they said, that's the leader we despise. That's the leader that drives us crazy, that when Darb's in the office, we don't want to be around. We want to get out of there as quick as possible. When Darb's in the office, we don't want to talk to you because you're short-tempered and you default to this intensity that makes us all uncomfortable. And Jake, it was like this wake-up call of, again, here I am writing leadership books, but yet I've got this reality of Darb and Brad with my own team that's showing up on a regular basis now, and this is an issue. And the self-awareness in me had to come to a new reality that, Brad, like, Darb is way too common nowadays. And my team was not, this was a way for them to approach me and to speak truth into me without it being weird and we're at Dave & Buster's. This is funny. But I think a lot of us as leaders, like, we have teams standing around us and working with us, and that are part of our world, that they now have a nickname for us. And it might be your name backwards, or it might be something else, but they know all the things that are dysfunctional about you. And the humble part of H3, so important to the humble part, is this idea of self-awareness. And do I know that I'm Darb? Like, do I know that I do that? Because my team is saying we want a little less Darb and a little more Brad, but we also need to realize that you understand that you're Darbing us a lot of the time. And I think a lot of leaders, we race by that, and we don't have enough self-awareness to stop and go, oh my gosh, like the thing I said I would never do, or the thing that another leader did to me when I was young and in my 20s, I'm now doing to them. And this happens in parenting, it happens in life, it happens in friendships, it happens in leadership. And so, so much of self-awareness is the fuel and authenticity, and that ability to read my own mail. That is so much about humility. And the humble leaders are the ones, I believe, who are the most self-aware. Like, they are truly dialed in on all the things that they know about themselves that potentially are blind spots and potentially will take them out of the game, and potentially will will create dysfunction where all of a sudden, they're playing Darb again. So that's a huge part of the reason I started with Humble in the book, is that I really do believe it's the foundation to, if your leadership's going to be something that takes you places, then if you don't have that foundation of self-awareness and authenticity, then you're going to have a hard time ever living out humility.
And I think that's why the book resonated with me so much. As you were saying in the beginning, there's no groundbreaking, earth-shattering, brand new philosophies in this book that are going to stun people. But what it does is it takes a story like you just shared of Brad and Darb. And guess what? All of us leaders have a bit of Brad, have a bit of Darb in us. And what your book does is it takes those stories, it takes those lessons, those habits, and those principles, and it lays them out in a way that we can sit back without being offended and say, you know what? I think that my team would probably give me a little E-Cadge. Is that what my name backwards would be?
Yeah,
E-Cadge doll.
E-Cadge, yep, that's right.
And they would say, this is what they would say about me. And, sometimes that is okay. Sometimes you need to have a little bit of fire in you so that they can also see the good side, so that there's a discrepancy, so that they can see both sides of you. But that self-awareness is so important. And one of the things that really came home to me as you were talking about that, Brad, is, we've been out on this trip for a year now as a family. And I mentioned in the pre-interview, I have my 3 kids, 11, 9, and 5. And we left the States where all our family is, and we've been out on the road. And every day my kids are growing bit by bit. In fact, at age 11, my daughter's growing a lot of bits by a lot of bits. But because I'm here with her all day long, I see her every day, the change is hard to notice. But then we send pictures back and the family sees it and they say, oh my goodness, there is so much change happening. And I think that's why it's important that someone pick up a copy of H3 Leadership or leadership books. Not that you're going to discover something life-changing, but what you are going to notice is that you've grown 4 or 5 inches in a time that you thought you were just making these small incremental improvements. And so that really resonated with me in the book. Now, one of the things I did want to ask you about is you have a tremendous foreword in the book by Mark Burnett. And I got to ask you how that came about. What a great endorsement for your book.
Yeah, that's a fun friendship that's developed over the last several years. And Mark actually probably 6 years ago, maybe even 7 years ago. It's crazy. It's been that long now. But we were doing an event out on the West Coast in Orange County, a Catalyst event. And we invited him to come be a guest and talk about, at that point, he had been doing Survivor, and I think it just maybe started The Voice or was about to start The Voice show. And he was doing some other, shows, Apprentice and Celebrity Apprentice. And he was coming out with I think at that time, the Bible series, which was the most watched show ever on the History Channel and one of the most watched ever on all of cable TV. And we invited him to come and just share a little bit about that project and also just talk about being a producer and being in Hollywood. And so a mutual friend connected us, and then he showed up at our event and we just struck up a friendship. And so for the last several years, we try to help each other out, and we try to prefer each other and try to, if he's got a new project he's working on, get the word out on that. And then also allow him to speak life and inspiration into the Catalyst community. So when I asked him to do the foreword, he was a really quick yes, which I really was honored by. And the reason I asked him to do it was because, in the ways I've watched his leadership, which is, somewhat from a distance, but also a few times up close, I've seen these 3 H's lived out, humility, hungry, and hustle. And I mean, Mark would be a definition of hustle, especially in Hollywood. He showed up when he moved from the UK over to LA, and he was basically doing like nannying and babysitting when he first got to the US. And then he just started showing up and working hard and looking for opportunities. And then over time became arguably the most influential reality show producer probably in the history of TV. And, so his story is a inspiration to me. And it was a real honor to have him put his name on the book and give me a forward. And I love watching. I love going to The Voice, Jake, and watching the way Mark produces, because a lot of us who never have seen a TV show in its truest form, we think, well, we don't know, and so what's great about Mark at The Voice is he's letting people do their job. That was one of the things I noticed so quickly is he's there like shaking hands with sponsors and saying hi to the judges and hosting the VIPs. But in terms of Carson Daly as the host, I watched the show and Mark's not walking over telling Carson what to do.
Right.
He's not over in the director's ear going, "Hey, I need you to cut that camera shot a little bit closer." Or, "Hey, he's not going over to the musician saying, "Would you please play that riff in a little bit of a different format?" He's allowing people who are great at what they do to do what they do. And that's the role of a producer is you bring all these great, talented, uber talented people together and you let them run. And I started just doing a little bit of my own investigative reporting and asking people who were working there, "Hey, what's it like working for Mark Burnett?" And all of them would say at some point, they would say, "You know what, Mark, he lets us be great at what we're great at." And it was just such a great lesson of, man, the best way for him to lead, the best way for me to lead is to build a platform that other people can stand on. Like build something that has huge opportunity to impact people, but at the end of the day, it's not about you. So Mark Burnett's not standing up on the at The Voice welcoming everybody and saying hi, and he's not the star of the show. He's the guy behind the scenes in the shadows shaking hands. And for me, my leadership at the end of the day, I want my leadership to be that way, that I'm stage left, I'm stage right, I'm backstage, I'm side stage, and I'm building things that other people can stand on and that I can push people into the spotlight while I'm over in the shadows.
And you and I didn't script this, but I got to tell you, I wrote down one quote from the book that really stuck out to me. And the quote, it goes something like this. I only made notes of it, but what is the role of a leader? Hire right, put them in the right seat, give them the resources they need to be successful, and then get out of the way. And we just heard that's exactly what you've been teaching. And like I said, we didn't script this, but that's the only quote from the book that I wrote down to talk to you about today. So, Brad, our time is running short. You have been an awesome guest, but I want to be respectful of your time, and I know you're busy. You got a lot going on. Before I let you go, I'd love to ask you just 5 or 6 rapid-fire questions, get to know you a little bit. Is that okay?
Come on, let's do it.
All right. How about the book currently on your Kindle or bedside table?
Oh, gosh, I knew you were going to ask me that, and I've got so many that I'm reading, but I'll give you one, and it's Talk Like Ted, which there's actually 2 versions. One is by Carmine Gallo, and then there's another one by Chris Anderson, who is the curator of TED, and both are really good.
Which one's on your bedside table?
Well, they both are, but let's go with the Chris Anderson version of Talk Like TED.
I've read the other one, but I haven't read that one. How about the best movie ever made?
I'm gonna say 2, and I don't know if they're the best movies ever made. They're the ones for me that are most personal to me. One is Lonesome Dove. Nobody knows Lonesome Dove, but I love that. That very few of your listeners will know that it's a 1980s documentary miniseries with some classic actors and actresses, and it's a Western,
including the host.
You don't know? You've never watched Lonesome Dove?
Nope.
I'm telling you, put it into your put it on your list for. I don't even know if it's on Netflix, but you may have to go get the actual VHS version of it. But Lonesome Dove is a classic Western miniseries that is by far one of my favorites.
Wonderful. And you said there was a second one?
Hoosiers is my second one.
Oh, yes. A great one.
The great story of Jimmy Chitwood, who takes the team that couldn't all the way to the state championship.
How can you not love it? What is your leadership superpower?
Connector. That is I think what the thing that I can probably do as well or better than most others is be a true connector, both of opportunities, of people, of organizations, of movements, and real quick, the difference between a networker and a connector.
Yeah.
A networker is all about themselves, and a connector is all about others.
Oh, such an important distinction too. Thank you for bringing that up. How about a motivational quote, philosophy, or mantra?
Well, I'll give you this one, Jake. I mean, for me as a man of faith, person who calls myself a follower of Jesus, like my my sort of mantra for life is preach the gospel and at all times, and if necessary, use words. And so for me personally, I want my life to be a reflection of the gospel in such a way that people are around me and they go, man, whatever you got, like I really like what's on you, and I like who you are, and the things that are deep in you, I may not agree with, but I truly respect. The other one is that I mean, Maxwell's famous for this. It's not mine. Is leadership is influence, and I just really believe that, especially today more than ever. That it doesn't take hierarchy or position or title or longevity to make a difference in the lives of people today. It's actually influence. And so if you're at the bottom of the barrel, or if you're just starting out, or if you're just starting your new initiative or whatever it is, like know that your path to impact is actually way shorter than you think it is, because it's already in front of you. It doesn't take you building something significant necessarily to have impact. It just requires that you see people around you as potential opportunities to make a difference in their life. And this is good news. I mean, all of us, which does put it really, I'm not being short on this one, like we're supposed to be in the rapid fire round, but it does put pressure and responsibility on all of us, because we're all leaders. If we define it as influence, that means all of us are making a difference.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree with you more. And I love that quote, something that I use often. Didn't realize it was a John Maxwell original, but leadership truly is influence. And when you talk about preaching the gospel and at all times when necessary, use words, I think of leadership as well. And I say, as a leader in front of your people, you remember the story you told us about John Maxwell and the barbecue in Kansas City or in St. Louis. And you said, look, here's a guy who is being a leader at all times. Oh yeah, and when necessary, using words.
You got it.
How about final one, best book ever written?
Well, I mean, my default would be the Bible. I'm going to give you, I'll try to give you one that is a more like modern, practical book. I might say from a business side and from a leadership side, man, Good to Great's hard to beat. It really is. I mean, if you had to force me to say one book, I probably would take that one and put that on everybody's shelf. Just, it's a classic Jim Collins. Yeah, I'm going to say Good to Great.
Yeah, and we love everything Jim Collins on this podcast, but I have to tell you, recently, Great by Choice has had a significant impact on my life and my business, because it takes it basically after the economic crash in 2008, how these companies came out of that looking strong. So we love everything Jim Collins. Brad, I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for carving out just a little bit for modern leadership. You truly brought the value. You are a leader. We can't recommend the book H3 Leadership enough. How can we find out more about you and pick up a copy of the book?
Yeah, well, thanks again for just your kind words, Jake. I appreciate it, man. And I'm on all the social media outlets, just my first and last name. So Brad, Lomenick, and that's website. That's all the different outlets for Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, etc. And then the book is available most places. Amazon. It's available at most bookstores, but Amazon's probably the best place to go.
And we just gave away a copy of the book to a listener just last week from Amazon, because we love the book so much. Brad, thank you for your time, and hope to catch up with you again shortly.
Awesome, man. Thanks for having me, Jake. Appreciate it.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that leadership journey with Brad Lomenick and H3 Leadership. Be humble, stay hungry, and hustle. Just love that title. Sure enjoyed my conversation with Brad. I didn't know about this book, and I didn't know about his relationship with John Maxwell when I picked it up. It comes highly recommended, as I mentioned at the start of the show. And sometimes I don't know where I get these recommendations, but they stick with me or they intrigue me. I pick them up, I read them, and it's great to sit down with the author and get their perspective. I really enjoy a lot of stuff coming out of John Maxwell, his leadership training. And so to hear that that's kind of the foundation of where Brad got his start was amazing. And it actually made sense to me as I look back now that a lot of the ideas are really rooted in that leadership and influence position that we talk so much of. Of course, my big takeaway from this episode, other than, of course, talking about the airport and getting through all the security and everything there, is that role of a leader. Getting people on the right bus, making sure that you hire right, find them the right seat, give them the resources they need to survive and excel, and then get out of the way. I also really enjoyed our conversation about changing the world. Not just making a dent, but really changing the world. And that relationships are critical to making that impact. Of course, everything that we talked about, including how to connect with Brad and pick up a copy of his book, all of that is found on the show notes of this episode. You can find it at jakeacarlson.com/ML18, episode 18. And like I said, there you can get everything. Now, next week, we're going to have a lot of fun. We're going to talk about retirement. A couple weeks ago, I mentioned that never retire attitude, that never retire mindset. Well, I put together an entire episode to talk about why you should never retire or have the mentality, the mindset of not retiring. And so I think you're going to really enjoy that. I will see you next week. Until then, have a great day, make a great life, and stay awesome. Thanks for listening to the Modern Leadership Podcast. You can find me on Facebook at Speaker Jake, on Twitter at Jake A. Carlson, and of course the website, jakeacarlson.com. See you there.